It may not have been the best game of the Seattle Kraken season so far, but it certainly was one of the more exciting ones. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R for another Seattle Kraken loss, but as a fan, obviously, it just doesn't really feel like it. The Kraken do end up losing 5-4 in overtime, but that really doesn't feel like the story so much as how we end up getting there. But before the game can even get started, it was already a wild day for the Seattle Kraken. Somewhat worryingly, Sheahan and Gord become players 2 and 3 with Blackwell before them to go on the COVID-19 list since Gio's return. So I guess if you were worried about this team getting worse as they got healthier, as we talked about in the last game, well, they're certainly not getting healthier here. And in order to have enough forwards for this game, the Kraken do call up Alex True, and he quickly gets to Seattle for what ends up being his first game for the Kraken. But those weren't the only roster moves made by the team before this game, as, at least on the good side of things, Chris Driedger is able to come off of the IR, which does mean that Decord is back to the AHL. And it's just in time with Driedger, with the back-to-back coming up Tuesday and Wednesday. So as far as the lineup is concerned, again, all the forwards they have are playing, and on the defensive end, again, that carousel on the bottom pairing continues to rotate, this time with Fleury and Lauzon getting the start, Borgen and Soucy sitting. Also worth noting on the Columbus end, Gavin Bayreuther, who was the Kraken selection from the Blue Jackets in the expansion draft, although they didn't sign him as UFA, he signs back with them, is now starting in this game for the Blue Jackets against Seattle, in what is also the second and final meeting for these teams this season. As we get into the game, the Kraken get some early pressure and some early shots off on goal. Nothing high danger, but at least it's a good start for Seattle in the first period, which is not necessarily something we've been able to say a whole heck of a lot to this point in the season. And as the first period goes on, the Kraken continue to mount that pressure, and eventually the higher danger chances do start coming, with the first one coming from Alex Wennberg close to the net, who was drafted by and played his first few years with the Blue Jackets. The shot from Wennberg is saved, and then next it's Marcus Johansson skating through the defense, going for the wraparound chance, which he gets to the goal line, but just can't quite get it over, as Merzlikins at the last second is able to get his toe to the post to keep this one from getting into the net and giving the Kraken the early lead. Meanwhile, on the other end of things, Lauzon makes a nice defensive play to thwart a 3-on-2 opportunity for the Blue Jackets at the blue line, as they don't even end up getting their first shot on goal until 10 minutes into the game. Technically speaking, 9 minutes and 55 seconds, but we'll round up. A minute later, there's chaos in front of the Columbus net that gets a number of good scoring chances for the Kraken, but the puck just can't quite get across the line as it does stay out of the net once again. However, this does get the crowd into the game, who really haven't had a whole ton to cheer for and have been relatively quiet over the last couple of games. It is also probably worth mentioning that while the Kraken have gotten off to a good start in this game, the Blue Jackets have gotten off to a very sloppy one, as they can't connect on a crossing pass to save their lives after having been given a number of opportunities to do so in the Kraken end. However, eventually chaos in front of the Kraken net late in the first does lead to an opportunity for Nyquist, who gets the puck past a prone Grubauer, but somehow, even though it gets past Grubauer, the puck manages to stay out of the net on what should have been an easy goal for Nyquist, and it turns out that that's thanks to the outstretched stick of Adam Larsson, who is able to close off the corner of the net and keep this one off the board. Columbus is able to build off of this a little bit and get some late pressure to close out the first period, even getting a few shots off to get at least closer in that category where they had been massively outshot early on. But thanks to Larsson's save and then Grubauer late in the period, we do get to the first intermission still scoreless. Right out of the gate in the second period, the Kraken are bound and determined to change that, getting tons of early pressure and a number of shots off on goal, the best scoring chance of which comes when they get an odd man rush closing on the net. The puck's on Donato's stick, and he has Donskoy on the other side for what will be an easy goal if he can get the pass across to him. Being that this would be a Donskoy goal, however, and since we obviously can't have that, the last possible guy that could stop what would be an easy tip-in for Donskoy on the pass from Donato is able to do so, breaking up the pass. That being someone that, if you've been around this channel since the expansion draft, you might be familiar with in Jake Bean. Shortly after, True gets involved for the first time, just not in a good way, as he gets called for a slashing on Merzlikins, though to be fair, he probably did end up getting the worst of this when the Blue Jackets retaliate. Still, you can't be doing that, and he deservedly heads to the box. Thanks to a good kill by the Kraken, Columbus really isn't able to get much of anything going on the power play, and then seconds after True comes out of the box, they decide they've had so much fun killing the penalty that they want to do it again, as Wemberg heads to the box right after True gets out, and it's another penalty kill for the Kraken, this time actually even better than the first one. So the Kraken are able to successfully kill off 4 minutes of Columbus power play. What those back-to-back penalties do for Columbus is they do shut down the Kraken momentum that they had built up early and keep Seattle on their heels coming out of the second one. And a couple minutes later, a wide open Bjorkstrand is able to convert, beating Grubauer and breaking the ice to make it 1-0 Blue Jackets. Grubauer then immediately does have to make a very nice save right off the faceoff to keep this game from becoming 2-0. And shortly after that, has to make another one on a once again wide open Bjorkstrand from pretty much the exact same spot that he just scored the goal from. In what has quickly become a, up until this point this season, rare bad second period for the Kraken, Columbus continues to pour on the pressure, which does, after a few tries, eventually lead to 2-0, when Voracek off Domi finds Roslovic sneaking in the back door, who tips this one home past Grubauer to give them the 2-0 lead. At least this time, Seattle is able to respond and actually gets one of their own right back, as a turnover from Columbus at their end of the ice gets to Eberle, who finds McCann and with his great wrist shot, is able to rainbow it somehow over Merzlikins and into the net to not only get the Kraken their first goal in about 120 minutes of play going all the way back to the second period of the Pittsburgh game, but also to pull them within one, so maybe we actually have a game on our hands. Right up until we don't, as Domi gets past Larson on a partial breakaway and is able to beat Grubauer to make it 3-1. Then, with less than a minute left in the second period, Dunn gets hit up high in the neutral zone, goes to the ice holding his face, but for the second game in a row, there's inexplicably no call made, a turnover ensues, a shot on goal, it leaks through Grubauer, and Domi is able to tip it home. 4-1. Now sure, for the second game in a row, this one is somewhat on the refs, but there was also a chance to not only stop this goal, but the last two from happening back in July. That of course being to just draft Max Domi in the expansion draft where he was exposed. Instead, they decided to draft Gavin Bayreuther, and now Domi has 4 points in 5 periods against them, and Bayreuther is also playing in this game. For the Blue Jackets, because he left in free agency and signed right back with Columbus. And if it wasn't for them picking Quinville from Chicago, that very well may be the worst pick they made in the expansion draft. And still, here now in December, it makes almost no sense whatsoever. I guess you could point out that if they had picked Domi with the current cap situation, it probably means they don't end up signing either Schwartz or Winberg, which if that's Schwartz, maybe that is a hit you don't want to take considering how he's done so far this season. But still, it's a bad look considering how things have gone for Domi at the early part of this season, especially against Seattle. So we do get to the start of the third period with the Kraken down 4-1 to Columbus, which isn't where you want to be regardless of opponent. But with Columbus, this is a team that's pretty decent defensively and has a good goaltender in Merzlikins. Maybe he hasn't had the ideal start to his season, but he certainly seems like he's been on tonight, and this game is basically over at this point. And coming off of that incredible win against the Oilers to start off this homestand, it's going to finish with 3, maybe if not terribly poorly played, extremely frustrating games against Pittsburgh, Winnipeg, and now the Blue Jackets. For the third period in a row, Seattle is able to get early pressure, so I guess moral victory that they're at least starting off periods well now. The puck still ends up at the other end of the ice where Grubauer lays a hit against the boards behind the net, which was certainly something to see. Somehow the puck doesn't end up in the net with it wide open, and the period continues with the Kraken still down 3. Just a few minutes into the period, Seattle does finally draw a penalty and get onto the power play, but again, this is a power play that, after having been hot during the winning streak, has definitely cooled off in these last couple of games. And here, once again, early on in this power play, they have a tough time getting control and getting much of anything going. Eventually, they are able to get things set up and spend a little while passing the puck around the outside until eventually Donskoy does take a shot. And it's in! It's not Donskoy's first goal of the season though, as he ends up getting robbed by Schwartz's butt as he, jumping in front of the net, has it go off of his back end and into the net to get the power play goal for the Kraken. For Schwartz, who was screening on the plate, I do think he was more desperately trying to get out of the way of this one so Donskoy could have his goal than to tip it in. Obviously, he ends up being unsuccessful and does get credit for the goal with his... I don't know if he was inspired by the nutcracker happening around the corner, but he does kind of one of these. I don't know if that's a ballet move. If I can do it, it probably isn't. But even if it doesn't work in the ballet, it turns out it does work in the NHL to score goals. So now it's 4-2, and while that's still going to be difficult to come back from, at least the goal came early in the third period, and 4-2 is certainly more manageable than 4-1. And now it's 4-3! Just 22 seconds after the power play goal, it's Morgan Geekie who makes it 4-3 off of Mason Appleton and himself. Tanev ends up getting the secondary assist, but this play happens as Geekie indirect passes off the boards up to Appleton, who does get defended well in the defensive zone, keeps control of the puck, gets it to Geekie, who's coming into the offensive zone, and he finishes the play into the back of the net with a beauty of a goal, and the Kraken, now still early in the third period, are within one, and all of a sudden, it's a game again. It stays 4-3 for most of the rest of the third period, with a lot of back and forth play and not a ton of chances either way, though the crowd is absolutely on every chance the Kraken get at the other end. Eventually, this all changes when Columbus has a very good shift that gets a good amount of pressure and shots off on net in the Kraken end. Grubauer and the defense are able to shut this down, and going the other way, it's Järnkrok taking the puck into the offensive zone. He has a shot, but chooses not to take it, instead circling back, opting to keep possession. And at this point, with about 4 minutes left in the game, you might be thinking that it's about time to start thinking about pulling Grubauer with just down one goal. It still might be a little bit early for that, again down just one goal at this point, but we also have seen them pull Grubauer a couple of times a little bit earlier than you would typically recommend. And I'll be honest, I was mentally preparing for a 5-3 loss with a ill-timed pull of Grubauer and an empty netter for Columbus. Either way, it was a fun comeback up until this point. But as it turns out, there's no reason to worry about an early Grubauer pull, because there's no reason to worry about pulling Grubauer whatsoever. And why is that? Well, that's because, coming back to Järnkrok, as he circles back to the blue line, he finds Larson coming into the zone, who quickly passes that off to Dunn on the other side, and he snipes it home to make it 4-4. And we are tied! As the Kraken have come all the way back from being down 4-1 at the beginning of the period with 3 unanswered goals. And I'll tell you what, I've seen people talking about how this arena so far has not been as loud as a lot of people were expecting it to be, and in some cases downright quiet, especially in the last couple of games where, yeah, it's true for the vast majority of the game, you could pretty much hear everything that the players were saying on the ice. But when this one went in to tie up the game late in the third, it was about as loud in there as an arena can be. Honestly, about as loud as I've heard any stadium be, and I've been to a number of Seahawks games where it got pretty loud, including one of the ones where they broke the sound record. Okay, maybe it wasn't quite as loud as one of those peak Seahawks games, but there are 60,000 less people in this building, and while it is fully enclosed, the roof is also entirely lined with acoustic panels, which do deaden some of the sound. Either way, it was pretty loud in there. And even including the Edmonton game, although close, probably the loudest I've heard it. After both teams do get chances in the closing minutes of the third period to take the lead and win it in regulation, we do eventually get to overtime, still tied at 4, for the first overtime in Seattle, and also the second time in as many chances against the Bluejackets. Sadly, after all of that and the insane comeback that the Kraken have in the third, also, for the second time in as many games against the Bluejackets, overtime does not last very long when Jake Bean is able to get one past Grubauer, who is somewhat screened by Johansson, and the game ends just a minute in. But at least, even if the players were frustrated they weren't able to finish off the comeback in overtime, they are able to mount that incredible comeback in the third period after looking like they were dead and buried at the start of it, to come back and salvage a point in this one. Now, it is easy to find the negatives in this game, and believe me, I was ready to harp on them at the end of the second period, especially when you look at the 3 stars of the game, the first one being Jake Bean and the second one being Max Domi, both of whom the Kraken had a chance to select in the expansion draft. Obviously, instead of Bean, they end up getting Morgan Geekie, so that really doesn't look terrible in the long run. And with Domi, well, we already talked about that at the end of the second period, so we won't get any more into that choice. Plus, you know what? After a couple of, again, very frustrating games against Pittsburgh and Winnipeg, with how this third period went, and I think it being pretty clearly the best third period the Kraken have had so far, I think it's fair to just feel good about how this game ended, and feel good going into this road trip for the Kraken. It's true, Grubauer certainly didn't have his best night, and while Dunn has looked very good for the Kraken so far this season, he had a couple of defensive blunders in this one, although that ends up getting overshadowed by scoring the game-tying goal. For Geekie, after having been kept off of the scoring sheet for the most part since early on in the season, gets his first goal in 16 games, where, to be honest, the most he's really contributed is being an absolute legend in the face-off circle so far, and easily the Kraken's saving grace there. Johansson and Larson both had their ups and downs. Johansson, I thought, had a really good game until he screened Grubauer on the overtime winner, and Larson saved a goal, but also gave up that partial breakaway that Domi scored on in the second. Appleton also continues to play pretty well for the Kraken, even if it doesn't always get him on the scoring sheet. He does at least get an assist in this game. And because I know there are going to be people who want to comment about that third pairing defense of Fleury and Lauzon they chose to go with tonight, I will say that they looked pretty good in this one, the both of them. Lauzon again having at least one good play that shut down an odd man chance, and also getting his one big hit of the game in later on. Overall, it's still definitely been a rough start to the season for him, and I get that when the team's losing more games than they win, having a scapegoat is something that everyone looks for, but I think Lauzon hasn't been as bad as some people might think he has. But obviously, everyone's entitled to their own opinion, and I still do enjoy reading every comment that you guys leave down in the comment section after each game, and responding to as many of them as I can get to. And as far as this game is concerned, well, obviously it would have been better to come away with 2 points. Considering how the game ended, I think it's alright to feel good about getting the 1, and have this team going into the road trip on a positive note, at least with how they were able to come back in that game. And I guess only time will tell if they are able to carry that into the back-to-back coming up on Tuesday and Wednesday in San Jose and then in Anaheim, against 2 teams that they need to catch up to in the standings if they do want to make a push for a playoff spot, which might be a long shot, but is still possible. For now though, that will do it for this one, so if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, the buttons down below do help support the channel, so I'd appreciate you using them. And until next time, stay safe out there, be good to each other, and go Kraken.